imagine this scenario, and I think it's one that probably hits close to home for almost everyone listening. You wake up, maybe head out to grab groceries, and that bottle of milk or cooking oil, whatever basic thing you bought just last week,
Yeah.
suddenly it's double the price, like literally overnight.
Wow.
You've got the same money in your wallet, same job, same everything, but boom, half the buying power just vanished.
It's more than just sticker shock, isn't it? It's this deep feeling of being cheated somehow,
Yeah,
economically robbed.
exactly.
That awful sensation where you're thinking, wait, why? Why did everything get so expensive all of a sudden? It feels like the value of your hard work, the hours you put in,
Yeah.
just evaporated.
And it wasn't some natural disaster, was it?
No, not usually.
Yeah.
Feels like that sometimes, but
Like-
often it's policy, an act of policy.
Right. And when that happens, you immediately start asking what actually changed? What happened in the economy to make prices jump like that?
Yeah.
And, the answer you often hear, kind of whispering around, it's always the same simple phrase. The government printed money.
That's the headline, definitely.
Yeah.
It's the quick answer. But honestly, just saying they printed money doesn't really cut it, doesn't explain the whole story.
No, it feels too simple.
It is. It misses the full, complex, and honestly really destructive process that takes root in an economy when this happens.
Yeah.
So our mission today in this deep dive is to really go beyond that simple headline. We're going to use our sources to walk through it step by step.
Okay.
We want to explore the real nature of inflation, show you exactly why just printing money isn't just, bad management. It's actually fundamentally a hidden tax.
A hidden tax.
Yeah, one that quietly siphons off the real wealth, the real value from everyday citizens.
Okay, so our goal here is pretty clear then. We want to unpack the nuts and bolts of how money printing can wreck an economy.
Right.
We want to really zero in on this idea of inflation as a hidden tax and maybe understand the basic economic laws that no country, doesn't matter how big or powerful, can actually escape.
Exactly. It's about figuring out where that vanished wealth really went and maybe, just maybe, how you can protect yourself a bit.
Let's dive in. All right, let's start with what feels like the biggest misunderstanding because intuitively it trips a lot of people up. When we talk about money printing, the common thought process is something like, okay, the government prints, say, a few billion new dollars or pounds or whatever. They put that into the system. So there's more cash floating around. Doesn't that mean people have more money to spend, more buying power? Doesn't everyone get, a little bit richer?
That's the intuitive trap, absolutely. And it's precisely that illusion that, sometimes governments rely on. On the surface, more cash looks like liquidity. It looks like the economy's moving, maybe growing. It feels easier financially for a bit.
Right.
But we have to make this absolutely crucial distinction, something our sources really hammer home. Money, the physical paper or the digital numbers, it's just a sign of value. It's a token we use for exchange.
It's not the value itself.
It is not the value itself. That's the key.
Okay, let's dig into that distinction because it feels really important. If the paper isn't the actual value, what is? Where does real economic value come from?
So real value, the stuff that actually represents wealth in a society, it comes from tangible things, real outputs,
Like what?
actual production factories making things, farms growing food, services being rendered, doctors, teachers, engineers doing their jobs, natural resources being pulled out of the ground, and fundamentally, human labor itself. That's the bedrock.
Got it.
If a country is genuinely productive, making better products, offering useful services, innovating, then it's creating real wealth. If you bake, say, 100 loaves of amazing bread, you've created 100 units of real economic value right there.
Okay, so the takeaway here is if the country as a whole isn't actually making more stuff or doing more valuable things, if that underlying real production isn't going up, then just printing more paper doesn't create more wealth. It just means you have more pieces of paper chasing the exact same amount of actual goods and services.
Precisely. You've hit the nail on the head. That is the core mechanism of, the potential destruction here.
Yeah.
The second the government prints more notes or, in today's world, creates more digital money, more credit electronically.
Right. It's not always physical printing anymore.
Not at all. But whether it's physical or digital, if it happens without a matching, genuine increase in real production, they're simply increasing the number of monetary units chasing the exact same pool of available goods and assets.
It's like adding more raffle tickets after the prize has already been set.
That's a great way to put it. The prize pool, the real stuff stays the same, but now there are way more tickets claiming a piece of it.
Which means just by the basic laws of supply and demand, something has to give. If the total amount of stuff available, let's call it the nation's economic pie, stays the same size, and you suddenly double the number of currency units circulating, then every single slice of that pie must now cost twice as many currency units as it did before. The price just has to adjust upwards to balance things out.
It's the unavoidable outcome. It's basic math, really.
Yeah.
And it's critical to stress. It's not that the goods themselves suddenly became twice as valuable. That loaf of bread didn't magically get better overnight.
No.
It's that the money itself became less valuable. Why? Because the government or the central bank made it artificially abundant, flooded the market with it.
So more supply of money means lower value for each unit of money.
Exactly. That increased abundance cheapens the currency.
Yeah.
And that process, that dilution of value, well, that's the very beginning of inflation.
Okay, so building on that, let's frame inflation in the way it actually feels to people, the practical, sometimes painful reality. Inflation is basically the process of your money getting weaker every single day.
Yeah, that's a good straightforward way to put it. It's this invisible, steady erosion of what economists call purchasing power.
Purchasing power, let's make that concrete.
Okay, think about it like this. Take a specific amount of money, say 100,000 units of whatever your local currency is. 10 years ago, maybe you took that 100,000 to the supermarket and you filled up 2 big shopping carts.
Right, felt like a lot of money.
It did. But today, you take the exact same 100,000 units, same note, same number in your bank account, and you go to the same store. Maybe you can only fill 1 cart, or perhaps only half a cart.
The number didn't change, but what it buys did, drastically.
Exactly. The numerical value stayed the same. 100,000 is still 100,000. But its utility, its power to actually acquire real things, real goods and services, has been slashed.
And this leads us right into this core idea from our sources, calling inflation a hidden tax. Now, if governments need money, and they always do, for roads, schools, defense, all that, why don't they just raise taxes directly, increase income tax or sales tax?
Well, because doing that is politically toxic. It's really, really difficult. Think about it. Announcing a direct tax hike, hey everyone, your income tax is going up 5% next year. That's loud. It's immediate. People feel it directly in their paychecks or when they buy things, and that leads to massive public anger, protests, maybe losing the next election. It's politically dangerous.
Okay.
Especially when governments are facing big budget holes or need a ton of cash quickly for, say, a big infrastructure project or unexpected war spending or just meeting the public payroll every month. Direct taxation is slow, painful, and causes immediate political backlash.
Right. Whereas printing money, it's quiet, it's easy, it avoids all that immediate political heat.
Precisely. Printing money or creating it digitally is the silent alternative. It achieves the same fundamental goal. It gets funds into the government's hands, but it does it sneakily. It confiscates the public's purchasing power without ever sending them a tax bill.
How does that confiscation actually work then?
Well, the technical term the sources mentioned is seigniorage. It's basically the profit a government makes by issuing currency. It costs very little to print a $100 bill, obviously much less than $100.
Right.
By creating new money and spending it first, the government gets the full purchasing power of that new money before it circulates widely and causes prices to rise for everyone else. They extract real resources, they buy goods, pay salaries, fund projects, using money that will soon be worth less, effectively taking value from everyone holding the existing money. It's revenue generation through dilution. Stealth tax.
This is where that famous cake analogy really helps visualize it, right? It perfectly shows how this hidden tax works on the value of our money without us even noticing until later.
Yes. The cake analogy is brilliant for this. It's crucial. Imagine you have one cake, a single delicious fixed size cake. That cake represents the total real value in the economy. All the goods, all the services available to be bought.
Okay, one cake. Real stuff.
Initially, let's say that cake is divided equally among 4 people. Each person gets a nice, solid quarter slice. That's their share of the real value.
Makes sense.
Now, here's the trick. Without baking any more cake, remember, the real economy hasn't grown. The government, the money printer, suddenly announces, hey, we've just created 4 new units of currency. Let's represent these new units as 4 new people showing up wanting cake.
Uh-oh. So now there are 8 people, but still only 1 cake.
Exactly. The real value, the cake itself, hasn't changed size at all. So to accommodate 8 people sharing a cake that was meant for 4, what has to happen?
Everyone's slice gets smaller, cut in half.
Precisely. The original four people representing the original money holders suddenly find their share of the cake, their purchasing power, their real wealth has been cut in half. They didn't vote for a tax increase. They didn't get a notice.
Nothing.
Nothing. Their wealth was just silently confiscated simply because new competing currency units were created out of thin air.
It's insidious because it happens without any warning. You don't get an official letter saying, congrats. As of today, your savings are worth 5% less.
Wouldn't that be something?
Yeah.
No, you see the price of gas inching up at the pump. Your rent goes up again. Groceries cost more. And your first instinct is often to blame the gas station owner or the landlord or the supermarket chain.
Yeah, you think it's greed or supply issues.
Right. You assume it's the seller being greedy, not the currency itself becoming weaker because the supply of it was secretly increased. That's the genius, the effectiveness of the hidden tax. Its impact is delayed, it's spread out, and it shows up disguised as rising prices, making it hard to pinpoint the real culprit, the dilution of the money supply.
Okay, this brings up a really logical question, doesn't it? If this process is so damaging, if history is littered with examples of money printing leading to economic ruin and hyperinflation, why on earth do governments keep doing it? Why fall for the short-term temptation?
That's the million-dollar question, or maybe the trillion-dollar question these days. And the answer is that the short-term benefits aren't abstract. They are very real, very powerful, tangible incentives, especially for politicians dealing with immediate crises.
Like what kind of crises?
Budget deficits, unexpected spending needs, maybe a recession where they feel pressure to do something. For a politician whose main focus might be the next election cycle, which is often pretty short.
Yeah, a few years at most, usually.
Right. For them, the immediate, visible benefits of printing money can seem to outweigh the long-term, sort of spread out, delayed costs of inflation. Those future costs might even fall on the next government.
But hang on, isn't there an argument that a little bit of inflation is actually good or necessary? You always hear central bankers talking about targeting like 2% inflation. They say it stops deflation, which can be really bad too. Are the sources ignoring that?
No, that's a really important point to clarify. The sources absolutely acknowledge that. Most mainstream economists today accept that a low, stable, predictable rate of inflation, maybe in the 1% to 3% range, can be beneficial. It encourages people to spend or invest rather than hoard cash, and it gives central banks some room to maneuver interest rates. It avoids that damaging deflationary spiral where prices fall, people delay spending, and the economy grinds to a halt.
Okay, so a little bit is considered okay.
Yes, the philosophy of aiming for slight, predictable inflation isn't the issue here. The problem we're discussing, the one highlighted in these historical examples, is excessive reliance on the printing press. It's when governments use money creation not just for fine-tuning, but as a primary tool to fix deep structural problems like chronic overspending or massive national debt.
Ah, so it's about why they're printing and how much.
Exactly. The moment the printing press starts running primarily to cover government budget caps rather than just facilitating genuine organic economic growth, that's when it turns toxic. That's when it becomes the hidden tax we're talking about.
Got it. So keeping that crucial distinction in mind, what are those specific immediate benefits that make reckless printing so tempting for governments facing pressure?
Well, number one, it's the easiest, quickest way to deal with existing debt.
How so?
If the government owes, say, $1 billion domestically, denominated in its own currency, well, if they can just print $1 billion new dollars, they can pay off that debt instantly. Poof, gone from the books.
But doesn't that just create inflation?
Yes, that's the catch. They pay the numerical amount of the debt, but the value of the currency they use to pay it has just been debased by the very act of printing it. So it's effectively a way for the government, the debtor, to default on the real value of its obligations without technically defaulting. It's great for them, terrible for whoever holds that government debt.
So it makes past debts seem smaller by making the money itself worth less. Sneaky?
Very. Second big lure. It makes paying the bills much easier.
Especially payroll.
Right. Governments employ a lot of people. Huge numbers. Public servants, military, police, teachers, the list goes on. They need massive, constant streams of cash just to make payroll every month and keep basic services running. Printing money is the path of least resistance to get that cash immediately. It avoids the political battle of raising taxes or the difficult, often slow process of trying to attract foreign investment or boost exports.
Just turn on the tap.
Basically. And thirdly, and this one is maybe the most politically seductive, it creates that temporary, artificial feeling of economic growth we mentioned earlier, the illusion that things are getting better.
How does that work?
Well, When all this new money suddenly floods the system, businesses might see a short-term uptick in sales. People might feel a bit richer for a moment because they have more cash in hand, so they might spend more.
So economic activity might actually increase for a bit.
It can, temporarily.
Yes.
The official statistics, like GDP growth, might even look better for a couple of quarters. This allows the politicians in power to point to the numbers and say, see, our policies are working, the economy is recovering. People mistake this surge in the flow of money for a genuine, sustainable economic boom.
And this temporary high, this brief moment of artificial good times is perfectly captured by that painkiller analogy, isn't it?
It really is the perfect analogy for this whole process. Printing money excessively is exactly like giving a powerful painkiller, like morphine, to someone who's seriously ill.
No.
It does reduce the immediate sharp pain. The debt crisis feels less urgent, the struggle to make payroll disappears, the political pressure eases off for a bit. But, and this is the critical part, it does absolutely nothing to treat the underlying disease.
And the disease is the real economic problem.
Exactly. The disease is structural.
Yeah.
Maybe the country isn't competitive internationally. Maybe there's rampant corruption. Maybe the government just spends way more than it takes in year after year. The printed money masks the symptoms, but the disease keeps getting worse underneath.
And eventually the painkiller wears off.
It always does. And when it does, the economy is left in far worse shape than before. Now they have to deal with the original structural problems plus the devastating side effects of the treatment, which is runaway inflation.
Okay, the theory makes sense. It sounds logical, but maybe a little abstract. To really feel the impact, we need to look at real-world examples, right? Our sources point to some absolutely devastating historical cases that show just how severe uncontrolled money printing can get.
Absolutely. Theory is one thing, but seeing what hyperinflation actually does to a society, it's chilling. We really should look at a couple of classic, stark examples to grasp the sheer scale of the destruction. Let's start with Zimbabwe.
Ugh, Zimbabwe. Especially around the late 2000s, right? That's often the go-to example for monetary collapse. What was happening there? Why did they print so much?
The context was pretty grim. The Zimbabwean government under Robert Mugabe was facing enormous costs, funding military adventures, maintaining political patronage networks, dealing with collapse. They turned to the printing press relentlessly.
Just kept printing to pay the bills.
Essentially, yes. To finance spiraling government spending and, significantly, to pay the army and security forces to maintain control. The consequence was entirely predictable, but the scale was just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Hyperinflation didn't just happen. It exploded.
How bad did it get? We hear crazy numbers.
The numbers almost lose meaning. Inflation reached rates of millions, then billions, then trillions of percent. The central bank was forced to issue banknotes in denominations that sound like science fiction. They famously printed the $100 trillion Zimbabwean dollar banknote.
100 trillion. It's hard to even picture that. What did that mean for an ordinary person just trying to buy, like, a loaf of bread?
It meant complete and utter chaos in daily life. That $100 trillion note. At times, it wasn't even enough to buy a bus ticket in the capital to Harare. Money became functionally useless almost overnight sometimes.
So how did people survive?
It was incredibly difficult. People needed literal sacks, backpacks, even wheelbarrows full of cash just to go grocery shopping for basics. Prices would change multiple times per day. You go into a shop, see a price, go get more money, come back an hour later, and the price would have doubled. The sheer anxiety must have been overwhelming.
Constantly worrying about your money losing value by the minute.
Exactly. People quickly abandoned the local currency. They resorted to barter trading goods directly for other goods or services. Businesses flat out refused to accept Zimbabwean dollars. They demanded payment in stable foreign currencies, like the US dollar or the South African rand, which circulated unofficially, or sometimes even in goods like fuel, cigarettes, or cooking oil, things that held tangible value. The currency completely failed in its basic functions. Store of value, medium of exchange, unit of account, total collapse.
And the really tragic thing is, Zimbabwe isn't some ancient history lesson. This cycle seems to repeat. More recently, we saw Venezuela go down a very similar, devastating path.
Yes, Venezuela's story in the last decade or so is another heartbreaking example. Their situation was maybe initially triggered by the massive crash in the price of oil, which was their main source of government revenue.
Right, they were heavily reliant on oil exports.
Extremely. So when oil prices plummeted, the government faced enormous budget shortfalls, but wanted to maintain popular social spending programs, and state control. Their solution: turn on the printing presses. Massive money creation to fill the gap.
Same story, different trigger.
Pretty much. And the result was the same nightmare: hyperinflation. Food prices were reported to be increasing by over 1,000% per year at points, sometimes much faster. The national currency, the bolivar, became essentially worthless.
In the human cost.
Devastating. A near total collapse of the formal economy. Shortages of food, medicine, basic goods. A massive humanitarian crisis unfolded, leading to millions of Venezuelans fleeing the country, one of the largest migrations in recent Latin American history. People left because their salaries, their life savings were wiped out in real terms. You couldn't survive.
Again, you saw stories of money being weighed instead of counted because the stacks of bills needed were just too large.
Exactly. The physical weight of the currency sometimes became more significant than its actual purchasing power. It's a stark illustration of money losing all meaning.
These examples, Zimbabwe and Venezuela, they really drive home the point that these economic laws seem universal. It doesn't matter if you're in Africa or South America, socialist or not, these principles hold. But we have to address the elephant in the room, or maybe the eagle, the US dollar. There's this widespread belief, or maybe hope, that because the US dollar is the world's main reserve currency, because it's used in global trade, that it's somehow special, immune to these forces. Our sources tackle this, right?
They do, and it's a really critical point for anyone listening, because the dollar's status affects everyone, directly or indirectly. The core message is, while the dollar's global role gives it some advantages and buffers, it is absolutely not immune to the fundamental law that increasing supply reduces value. No currency is.
And we saw a real-world test of this recently, didn't we, after the COVID-19 pandemic hit in 2020?
We certainly did. That was a massive, unprecedented economic shock globally. And the response from the U.S. Federal Reserve, the central bank, was equally unprecedented in scale.
What exactly did they do? Because it wasn't like they were printing stacks of physical $100 bills, right? That's not how it works at that level.
Right. Modern money printing at the central bank level, especially in developed economies, is largely digital. The Fed engaged in what's called quantitative easing, or QE, on a colossal scale.
QE, we hear that term a lot. What does it actually mean?
In simple terms, it means the Federal Reserve created new money electronically, literally just adding digits to accounts on a computer ledger. They didn't need a physical printing press.
Okay, created new digital dollars? Then what?
They used this newly created digital money to buy assets out in the financial markets, primarily government bonds and mortgage-backed securities from commercial banks and other financial institutions.
Why buy those assets?
The goal was to inject liquidity and confidence into the financial system during the crisis, to lower long-term interest rates, and encourage lending and investment to prevent a complete economic collapse, maybe like the Great Depression. The effect was that trillions of these new electronically created dollars flooded into the banking system and the broader economy. The overall money supply in the U.S. basically doubled in a very short period.
Doubled. So even though it was digital, the impact on the supply of dollars was enormous. Same principle as running the physical presses.
Exactly the same principle. Digital dilution instead of physical dilution. Now, the stated short-term goal, preventing an immediate catastrophic financial meltdown, was arguably achieved. The system didn't totally freeze up.
But there's always a but.
There's always a but. The inevitable lagged consequence of flooding the world with twice as many dollars, while the amount of real goods and services didn't double, was, well, inflation.
The inflation we've all been feeling in the last few years.
Precisely. In the subsequent years, the U.S. and much of the world experienced significant, sustained price increases, particularly noticeable in things like housing, rent, food, energy costs that hit everyday people the hardest. That abundance of newly created money eventually chased the available goods and assets, pushing prices up across the board.
So even the mighty US dollar isn't immune. It might take longer. The effects might be spread more globally because of its reserve status, but the basic law holds.
Absolutely. Zimbabwe, Venezuela, the U.S. response to COVID, they all confirm the same simple, universal economic truth. When something becomes artificially abundant, its value decreases relative to things that remain scarce. And that applies even to the world's most powerful currency. Money is not exempt from the laws of supply and demand.
You know, one of the things that makes this whole inflation thing so dangerous, so effective as that silent tax, is how long it can take for people to realize what's actually happening. Our sources talk about this lag, this silent sting. Why is it that the public often only grasps the severity of the crisis when it's already quite advanced?
It's down to the way inflation usually starts. It's insidious, it's gradual, It rarely begins with a sudden dramatic collapse.
It creeps up on you.
Exactly. It might start with, the price of bread going up just a little bit. Then maybe a few months later, gas prices tick up. Then your electricity bill seems higher. Then your rent renewal comes through with a bigger jump than usual. Each individual increase might seem explainable or manageable on its own.
You might blame the bakery or OPEC or the landlord.
Right. People tend to rationalize each price rise individually. They only recognize the systemic problem, the fact that their money itself is fundamentally losing value much later. Usually it's when they realize that even with regular pay raises, they can no longer afford the same standard of living. They can't cover basic necessities anymore. That's when the psychological shock hits.
But by then, a lot of damage has already been done to their savings and purchasing power.
A huge amount. And because people initially blame other factors, maybe a bad harvest, specific company greed, a distant war, supply chain snags, they don't immediately connect it back to the government's monetary policy. They don't recognize the structural source of the problem until much later.
And when the public finally does wake up, when people realize they're getting poorer because the currency is weakening, how do governments typically react? They don't usually hold up their hands and say, oops, our bad, we printed too much, do they?
Rarely, if ever. The standard political playbook at that point is almost always immediate deflection and finding scapegoats.
Okay, like who?
Governments will almost invariably blame external factors. It's classic. You'll hear things like, oh, it's the volatile global markets causing this inflation, or we're being hit by unfair international sanctions, or a very common one, it's the greedy traders, speculators, unscrupulous businessmen hoarding goods or price gouging.
So they point fingers at the private sector or foreign powers?
Absolutely. They'll blame geopolitical events, supply chain disruptions, which might be partly true, but not the whole story, anything but their own decisions about money supply and government spending. The focus is shifted away from the entity that actually controls the currency, the central bank, and the government's fiscal policy, and onto easier targets.
So these external factors, which might even be playing some role, become a convenient smokescreen to hide the much larger impact of the monetary policy decisions.
Precisely. A genuine global supply shock might cause, say, 5% inflation on its own. But if during that same period the government has also doubled the money supply through printing, the resulting 15% or 20% inflation is overwhelmingly due to the monetary expansion. But politicians will only talk about the 5% caused by the supply shock, conveniently ignoring their own contribution.
Okay, but let's say the printing doesn't stop. Let's say the government keeps relying on it. Maybe the situation gets worse. What's the inevitable path forward then? What does that full cycle of economic destruction look like based on history?
If the printing continues unchecked, it triggers a predictable and devastating sequence of events, a downward spiral.
What's the first step?
First, price increases start to accelerate rapidly. Inflation picks up speed, it moves from gradual increases to noticeable jumps, and then potentially to hyperinflationary levels. This happens partly because inflation starts to feed on itself. It becomes the self-fulfilling prophecy. People expect prices to rise, so they spend money faster, which pushes prices up faster, and so on.
It's a vicious cycle. Then what?
Second, and this is where the social fabric really starts to tear, the public loses all trust in the national currency, completely. People realize that holding on to cash is financially irrational. It's like holding melting ice. Every day, every hour, it's guaranteed to be worth less.
And when people lose faith in the money itself, what does that do to businesses, to the economy?
It's catastrophic for productive activity. Businesses start to fail widespread. Think about it. How can you possibly run a business, plan investments, or even sign a simple contract to deliver goods next month if you have absolutely no idea what your costs will be or what the payment you receive will actually be worth in real terms?
It makes planning impossible.
Utterly impossible. Long-term commercial activity just grinds to a halt. The economy shifts away from making things and providing services and towards just pure speculation and trying to survive day to day. This forces ordinary people to take drastic defensive measures.
And that defensive action is the flight into real assets, right?
Exactly. People desperately try to get rid of the failing local currency as quickly as possible. They rush to convert their savings, whatever is left, into things that can't be easily printed or debased by the government.
Like what kind of things?
Tangible assets, land, property, precious metals like gold or silver, sometimes durable commodities like oil or grain, or, very commonly, stable foreign currencies if they can get their hands on them like the US dollar or the euro. They're looking for anything that might hold its value better than the rapidly depreciating local money.
And this mass exodus from the local currency.
It creates another vicious feedback loop. As everyone tries to sell the local currency to buy dollars or gold, the value of the local currency plummets even faster. This accelerates the inflation, deepens the crisis, and ultimately leads to a major, full-blown financial meltdown that wipes out the savings of anyone who didn't or couldn't move their assets quickly enough. Usually, it's the poorest and the middle class who suffer the most.
It really is the same devastating pattern repeated across different countries and different centuries. You mentioned 1920s Germany, various Latin American crises, the recent examples. It proves this isn't some random accident. It's a predictable outcome of certain policy choices.
Entirely predictable. And sadly, often entirely self-inflicted.
Okay, after walking through that cycle of destruction, which is frankly quite terrifying, the obvious question is, how do you stop it? Is there an escape route? What's the core solution, the difficult medicine that needs to be swallowed to break this cycle?
Well, the core solution sounds deceptively simple, but putting it into practice is politically incredibly difficult. It boils down to achieving and maintaining a strict, disciplined balance between the amount of money created and the actual real output of the economy.
So stop relying on the printing press to pay for things.
Fundamentally, yes, that has to be halted. The government needs to live within its means, primarily through sustainable taxation and responsible borrowing, not by creating money out of thin air to cover chronic deficits or fund politically motivated spending.
So if new money is created, it should only happen under very specific controlled circumstances, only when it's actually backed by something real.
That's the ideal, yes. New money entering the system should ideally be linked to a genuine increase in the economy's productive capacity. For instance, if the country is producing significantly more goods for export, or attracting substantial, real foreign investment that builds new factories or infrastructure.
Things that create tangible value.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Things that enlarge that economic cake we talked about earlier. The expansion of the money supply needs to reflect a real-world expansion of goods and services available, not just an expansion of government IOUs.
Makes sense. But given the short-term political temptations we discussed, just saying be disciplined probably isn't enough, right? Our sources must suggest some more concrete structural reforms to prevent governments from constantly reaching for the printing press lever.
Absolutely. Discipline requires guardrails. The sources highlight several crucial structural reforms. The first one is perhaps the simplest, yet incredibly powerful: financial transparency.
Transparency. Meaning what exactly?
Meaning that government spending decisions, how budgets are allocated, tax revenues, debt levels, and crucially, the actions of the central bank in managing the money supply. All this information needs to be open, clear, understandable, and easily accessible to the public, to journalists, to watchdog groups.
Shining a light on it all.
Exactly. That hidden tax thrives in the dark, in complexity.
Yeah.
Sunlight, transparency is the best disinfectant. If people can clearly see how much money is being created and where it's going, it's much harder for governments to abuse the system quietly.
Okay, transparency is number one. What's the second key reform? It seems to target the source of the money creation itself, the central bank.
Yes, the second is ensuring the genuine independence of the central bank.
We hear this term a lot too, central bank independence. What does it actually mean in practice, and why is it so important?
It means the central bank needs to be structurally shielded from short-term political pressures and the immediate financial demands of the politicians currently holding office. Its primary, legally defined mandate must be focused on long-term price stability, keeping inflation low and predictable, and preserving the value of the currency.
Even if doing that is unpopular.
Especially if doing that is unpopular in the short term. For example, if the central bank needs to raise interest rates sharply to combat inflation, or if it needs to refuse to directly finance the government's budget deficit by printing money, it must have the legal power and institutional protection to do so, without fear of being immediately overruled or fired by the politicians.
So how do you actually build that protection? What are the mechanisms that make a central bank truly independent, not just in name? What stops a president or prime minister from just picking up the phone and ordering them to print, or firing the governor if they refuse?
That's where the legal and institutional structure is paramount. Real independence usually relies on several key features, often enshrined in law. First, the leaders of the central bank, the governor and the board, should have long appointment terms, often longer than a single political cycle, and ideally non-renewable, to insulate them from electoral politics. Second, their mandate needs to be crystal clear in the law. Focus on price stability above other potential goals, like maximizing short-term employment, which politicians might push for.
Makes sense.
Third, and this is critical, there should be strict legal limits, or ideally a complete prohibition, on the central bank directly lending to the government or buying government debt directly from the Treasury, especially at non-market rates. This forces the government to finance its deficits by borrowing transparently in the open market, facing the discipline of real investors, rather than just having the central bank print the money for them on demand.
So building walls between the politicians who spend money and the institution that creates it.
That's a good way to put it. Building strong institutional walls. And finally, there's a third solution, one that actually involves all of us, the citizens, and that's economic education.
Education, that seems a bit soft, maybe, compared to legal structures. Why is that considered so important as a defense?
Because ultimately, in a democracy at least, politicians respond to public pressure and public understanding. If the general public understands the basic mechanics of money, inflation, and government finance, if they grasp that printing money is not the same as the country getting rich.
If they understand the hidden tax concept.
Exactly. If people internalize that inflation is effectively a tax that erodes their savings and wages, they are much more likely to demand fiscal responsibility from their leaders. They'll be less easily fooled by populist promises funded by the printing press. An informed public makes it much harder for politicians to get away with using these kinds of stealth policies. Public demand for accountability is a powerful force.
Okay, so bringing this all back home to the listener, we've established that inflation, driven often by excessive money printing, is this gradual but relentless force. It eats away at real wealth, doesn't matter if you're in Zimbabwe, Venezuela, or the US. What's the final crucial takeaway from all these sources we've looked at?
I think the most actionable conclusion is this. Every single time new money is created, whether printed or digital, without a corresponding increase in real economic value, more goods, more services, more genuine production, a small piece of your real wealth effectively vanishes.
It just gets diluted away.
It gets diluted away. Your savings buy less. Your future purchasing power shrinks. The value you earned through your hard work is silently eroded.
So the next time you hear a political leader or an official talking about injecting liquidity or quantitative easing or maybe stimulus measures, but they don't talk about how they're going to boost exports or increase manufacturing output or foster real investment alongside it, you should probably remember this conversation. Remember that the money being supplied has to come from somewhere. And if it's not coming from real growth, it's effectively being funded by reducing the value of the money that's already sitting in your bank account or in your wallet. Hashtag tag outro.
And remember, economics, it often sounds complex, filled with jargon, dealing with huge global issues. But it's not just for professors and bankers. Honestly, everyone who earns a paycheck, spends money, tries to save, or makes an investment. You're essentially running your own personal economy every single day.
That's a great way to think about it.
Understanding these fundamental rules, we've talked about rules about value, about supply and demand, about the consequences of printing money, rules that govern even the biggest, most powerful nations. Knowing this stuff is absolutely essential for your own personal financial health and security.
If you really internalize this concept, how money printing works, what inflation actually is, it gives you power. The power to make smarter decisions with your own money.
Yeah.
The power to maybe protect your assets a bit better from the slow, silent decay of paper currency. And maybe the power to avoid being just an unwitting victim of government policies you didn't even realize were affecting you.
So perhaps here's a final thought, something provocative maybe for you to take away and mull over from this deep dive.
Yeah.
In a world where paper currencies, almost structurally, seem destined to become less valuable over time, because that political temptation to print is always there.
Yeah.
Maybe your economic knowledge itself, your understanding of where true value comes from, how these systems work, maybe that knowledge is actually your most valuable, most durable long-term investment, more valuable than the paper money itself.
That's a powerful thought. Keep questioning where the real value lies, and don't mistake the paper for the prosperity. Thanks for diving deep with us today.